Dr. Tweed! So nice to finally see you again. I trust that you have many stories to tell me about your adventures deep in the heart of Africa. Dr. Tweed beamed with a sheer delight as he greeted his colleague at the door. A red bow tie attached to the top of his khaki blazer gave the fellow an eccentric yet scholarly appearance. The old man squinted through his bifocals while beckoning Robert to the table with 2 cups of hot tea already being poured. "Robert, my good man," he began. Yes, of course. Join me for some tea, and I shall regale you with a tale regarding the most curious creature this old man has ever had the pleasure of coming across in all his years gallivanting around the globe." A friendly exchange of smiles and a pleasant handshake later, the 2 men had taken their seats. "So, Doctor, tell me about this mysterious creature of yours." Dr. Tweed's eyes lit up like a pair of bright blue sapphires. "Ah, yes. The African Bwana spider, named after the indigenous people who reside in a section of the jungle where the creature originally hails. It's a massive arachnid. I dare say the thing is about 1/2 meter in diameter, but that's not even the most interesting tidbit about it." "Good God, man!" Robert gasped. "I beg your pardon, Doctor, but I'm finding it quite hard to swallow that your interest in the tremendous girth of the spider would be eclipsed by an even more fascinating factoid." The old man's lips curled into a slight smirk upon hearing Robert's retort. "Ah, but eclipsed it is, my dear friend. Perhaps you'll understand once you hear the remarkable anecdote. On my 21st night exploring the Dark Continent, we found that one of our pack mules had begun to demonstrate bizarre and erratic behavior. The beast had started to crow and moan as though it were suffering from some sort of horrible illness. Our guides had previously warned my party that the primeval forest we made camp in was rife with poisonous asps, adders, and mambas, among other deadly serpents, so naturally, I hypothesized it had fallen victim to the bite of one of the jungle's venomous vipers. However, upon further examination, I could find no evidence of teeth marks on the animal. No wound, no prick, not a single thing that would indicate that it had been attacked. Sound like quite the conundrum, Doctor? Indeed, it was. Even more curious was the fact that, though I had found the animal's behavior to be somewhat unnerving, many of our party's guides appeared to be downright terrified at the sight of the mule's predicament. A few of them ran off from our campsite and into the darkness of the untamed jungle by themselves. The fools! I unloaded my rifle in order to put the creature out of its misery, as it was now writhing on the ground and seemed to be suffering quite considerably. But before I had the chance to pull the trigger, my eyes witnessed a truly incredible sight. No, Doctor, you aren't about to say— "Oh, but I am!" Out of the animal's mouth crawled the Bwana spider. Dr. Tweed took a sip of tea. Robert could tell by the old man's reaction that it was still a bit too hot to drink. Like I said before, it was colossal. Now, while I hadn't quite figured out how the giant thing was able to contort its body enough to crawl its way out of the beast's jowl, I do have a theory about what it was doing in there in the first place. Tweed paused a moment for dramatic effect, reveling in the mystery of his account. "Well, out with it then. I must say, good doctor, I'm absolutely enthralled by this story of yours. You must tell me what happened next." As it turns out, this particular species of arachnid has become quite feared by the natives, hence the reason why some of my party's guides had decided to take their chances out amongst the ferocious wildlife and poisonous flora of the jungle instead of staying at camp once they realized what was behind all of the ruckus. The remaining guides insisted that I shoot the spider, but you know me, Robert, I'm a man of science. What kind of academician would I be if I ended the life of such a spectacular specimen? An anthropod of such astonishing peculiarity must be studied alive. Robert interjected once more. "But doctor, you still haven't explained what it was doing inside the mule's mouth." "Have your patience, my good man. All will be revealed in time. You see, the natives believe the spider to be some sort of soul-sucking demon. One that feasts upon the very life force of a man, bleeding him dry until he becomes nothing but a useless, withered husk. Obviously, an educated bloke like myself would dismiss such silly notions as nothing but foolish superstition, but I do believe these primitive myths were onto something. Nevertheless, there is always scientific explanation for these things. From my brief encounter with the creature, I have gathered that the 8-legged Goliathan had evolved the most extraordinary of survival tactics. It appears that the spider entered our pack mule through the oral cavity. From there, it may have some way attached itself to the beast's nervous system, granting it full access to the mule's movements and the vocal patterns, essentially rendering the animal a useless puppet. When I say, what I'm saying, Robert, is that this creature was wearing our unfortunate ungulate like a hat on Sunday, and all of us were none the wiser. I have since postulated that the arachnid made itself a home in the body of its hooved host, feeding off its cerebral spinal fluid just long enough for it to plant a repulsive sack of eggs. Robert's eyes widened with interest. What an intriguing yet horrifying creature, Doctor. Perhaps the guides who fled into the night weren't as foolish as you say. Could you imagine what would happen if a thing like that was on the loose in England? People would be quite a panic. He and the old man shared a chuckle. The doctor took another sip of his tea. Could I imagine, Robert? Dare I say it already is. Dr. Tweed's head suddenly cocked back in a violent manner. Terrible, gagging noises emanated from his throat as blood began to trickle from his eyes, ears, and nose. 8 long, spindly legs emerged from his mouth. The gas station bathroom was one of the filthiest, most disgusting places Shelley had ever seen. The nauseating smell that permeated the air wafted into her face, violating her nostrils as soon as she opened the door, invading her mouth and nose before settling on the back of her tongue. Used toilet paper, bloody tampons, and cigarette butts littered the ground like repulsive landmines, waiting for some poor, unsuspecting sap only slightly more careless than she, to trudge through the cesspool in a rush and smear their revolting contents even further across the tile floor. One of the fluorescent lights above was flickering randomly with a sinister incandescence, as if it had a mind of its own. For a moment, Shelley contemplated testing her body's demand for reprieve until she could find another gas station with a cleaner restroom, but remembered the sign that she read on the interstate just before taking the rest stop exit. Next gas, 60 miles. Besides, nature had been urgently calling for a while, and it wasn't dialing number 1. Carefully, Shelley stepped around the nasty obstacles strewn around the ground and made her way towards the bathroom stalls. Another hot wave of noxious odor smacked her across the face as she opened the doors to reveal an abhorrent porcelain grotesquerie. Vomit began creeping its way up her throat when she took sight of the crap-covered commode, where only dull bits of white and grime were exposed here and there, like the last remaining survivor of some horrific catastrophe, having been caught in this volcanic explosion of feces which now cascaded down in all directions, billowing in and out of the toilet, bubbling like toxic sludge. Quickly, she shut the door. She turned away while holding her breath in a futile attempt to prevent any more of Mount Evershit's fecal fumes from reaching her already defiled lungs. The second stall was far less repugnant, and aside from the syringe that had sunk to the bottom of the toilet bowl's dirty water, it seemed almost sanitary. Almost. Shelley decided that it would have to do, partially because of the pressure building in her bowels, and partly because she feared that checking behind door number 3 might be pushing her luck. Summoning every ounce of courage in her body, she pulled down her panties and squatted over the seat, making sure not to touch her skin to the vile porcelain throne. The young lady had barely even begun to relieve herself when the bathroom erupted in a series of clattering and clanging so loud it nearly caused her to fall backwards onto the water out of shock. Someone had burst into the bathroom door in a flurry and knocked over the metal waste bin that had been standing next to the sink. Shelley remained silent, hoping that whoever had barged in wouldn't notice her. It was the middle of the night. As far as she was concerned, anyone causing such a ruckus in a dirty bathroom on the side of the highway was either addicted to smack or a raging lunatic. Either way, she wasn't about to let her presence known if she could avoid it. So, she clenched her cheeks and grimaced, fighting off the back-end rebellion. Loud groans were now emanating from the other side of her stall's door. It was a woman's voice, which only slightly alleviated Shelley's feelings about the predicament that she now found herself in. From under the door, she could see the strange woman's legs stumble closer in the direction of the stalls. With a crash and a bang, the woman exploded through the door number 3, raucously toppling down to the toilet. Moan turned to cries, and suddenly the trepidation Shelley had been feeling melted away, only to be replaced by panic as the woman just one stall over from her shrieked at the top of her lungs. She wanted to speak up, ask if everything was alright, but the noises coming from the other side of a flimsy metal barricade between them paralyzed her vocal cords. The woman began choking, her gags only briefly interrupted by the sounds of screams. A rank, potent stench swelled from the third stall and saturated the air in the room, even overcoming the vomit-inducing aroma Mount Evershit had been cultivating in the first stall. The woman's shadow, casted by one good fluorescent light on the bathroom, jerked violently in the grimy floor under Shelley's feet. Shelley tried desperately to drown out the horrific noises taking place behind door number 3, but they had gotten so loud that covering her ears barely muffled the woman's sobs. A symphony of sickening cries burst forth from the strange woman's stall. Shelley began to wonder how much more she could take before mind-numbingly awful sounds and smells would drive her mad. No longer capable of withstanding the war being waged on her senses, she tried to work up the nerve to make a break for the door, but before she had a chance to run, the noises abruptly halted. With a splish and a splash, the room fell silent. Shelley squatted over the toilet for what felt like minutes, doing her best to remain as quiet as possible. The woman in the third stall's shadow slowly started shifting again across the dingy bathroom floor. Shelley prepared for the screams to begin anew, but instead of filling the room with more of her ear-piercing shrieks, the woman fell off the toilet and rolled halfway underneath the divider between the two stalls. She lied there motionless, cheek flush against the urine-stained floor, and wide eyes looking up to the frightened young lady still squatting over the toilet with her thong around her ankles. Thick black fluid began to discharge from the woman's mouth and nose, dribbling down her face like chocolate syrup on a sundae. With her final few breaths, she forced a couple of tiny grunts out of her oozing mouth in an attempt to speak. You have to get out of here. Following these words, the last bit of life faded from her body. Shelley watched in terror while the woman's eyes rolled back into her head and the same black ooze started to trickle from her tear ducts. Something began splashing around in the toilet bowl inside the woman's stall. A cocktail of confusion, anxiety, shock, and dread swirled around inside of the young lady's head as she tried desperately to process what was taking place. From under the divider between the two stalls, Shelley watched a pair of feet covered in the very same black muck that was still seeping its way out of every orifice in the woman's face step down from the toilet and onto the bathroom floor. The rusty hinges fastened to door number 3 squeaked as whatever was inside slowly began to push the door open. Shelley covered her mouth with both hands, trying not to even breathe audibly, hoping to God that the thing on the other side of the wobbly tin divider between was not aware of her presence. The slimy feet shuffled clumsily out of the stall and across the scum-covered floor as if their owner was using them for the first time. Shelley bit down on her tongue, struggling to fight off the urge to scream as the sludge-coated feet stopped and turned towards her stall. A hush reigned over the room for what felt like an eternity. Finally, a gravelly, cracked voice broke the silence, emerging from the other side of Shelley's door. I'm terribly sorry, miss. But could you spare some toilet paper? I seem to be fresh out.